Colleagues are just about to go online, but I'd like to ask Councillor Lewis the score of the game since I see he's at the Gardens.
The game hasn't started. I hear it's been postponed until the fall.
Thank you, colleagues. Before we start this meeting, I'd like to give a shout out to the clerks who really, frankly, what I have seen have put tremendous effort into making sure these look a lot more seamless than they are, but they just do a great job, and I'd like to thank them for that. I'd like to call to order the 9th special meeting of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee meeting. And I will share this message as we do at the start of these meetings, that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing and advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city of service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. And to make a specific request to this meeting, please contact SPPC@london.ca. I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, I'll turn your attention to the consent agenda. We have one item, 2.1, London Middlesex Community Housing Inc. meeting of the shareholder resolutions regarding interim board appointments. And I think this is obviously worthy of discussion. I'd like to turn this over to Ms. Livingston, if I could, please.
Your Worship, we are returning to you from your March 31st meeting with a recommended slate of interim board directors for London Middlesex Community Housing. You will also see in the appendix an outline of the duties of that board. The last duty I would note is that they return with a recommendation to the shareholder with respect to the revised board composition. So what we have in front of you this evening is the recommended slate. I will note that there was a change this afternoon where Mr. Barrett is no longer able to stand, but the remainder of the slate is still in place. I'm happy to try and answer any questions, and I know Ms. Dadersbeer is also available to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Well, why don't we start that process? I'll look for any questions from colleagues. Councillor Hopkins, I have you on first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for this quick turnaround. I think it's really important that we sort of deal with this interim board. I do have a question through you, Mr. Chair, to staff about how long do you see this interim board of directors being in place? I know I'm not looking for specifics, or I just want to get some comments from staff as to how long right now will this interim board exist?
Ms. Livingston.
Through you, Your Worship, we anticipate it being no longer than to the end of this year. And in fact, if we can return with a recommendation on the permanent board sooner than that, we will, but certainly no longer than the end of this year.
Thank you. Ms. Hopkins, further?
No, I think I'll just wait for now. Thank you.
Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chair, I wonder if Ms. Livingston might address the issue of how this slate of directors, these people, match up to the desire to have people with property services and facilities management experience, and also human and community services experience. You could just clarify the people in that body of people who have that type of experience.
Ms. Livingston.
Through you, Your Worship, in terms of the community service and governance aspect, that is where we are looking For Ms. Wilcox, I'll ask Ms. Daters-Beer to comment on the property management aspect from the slate of recommended members.
Ms. Daters-Beer?
Through the chair, I would recommend that Mr. Yeoman and with the support of Mr. Purdy are able to facilitate discussions at the level of the board with respect to property management. There's also, for council's understanding or the shareholders' understanding, a great deal of support with the staff at LMCH, including a current city staff member who we've seconded to the Housing Corporation, Mr. Klingenberger, and he provides ongoing support to LMCH at this time as well.
Councillor?
Yeah, I just think I would say I appreciate those answers, and I'm supportive of this board, but I'm glad you were able to identify that we have expertise in those important areas on the board. So thank you.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the remote possibility that London Middlesex Community Housing might come in for, say, a land use application and not like the decision of the city. And then we could be in a situation where Ms. Anderson, who's the lawyer who handles those kind of things, is also a director of the organization. I just want to have Ms. Livingston, if you could address how that kind of situation would be handled. I wonder if it might have been related to why Mr. Barrett is not able to be a director. Go ahead.
I'll direct that back through me, either Ms. Livingston or Ms. Daters-Beer.
I'll refer it to Ms. Daters-Beer or Mr. Card, perhaps.
Through the chair, I can certainly start. I think it's important that board members, where they see themselves in a conflict of interest situation, would declare that, not dissimilar to whether or not the board members were community members or even council members. In my role as the board currently, I'm acutely aware of the fact that I'm both the managing director and also the board of LMCH. So there are times when I have to be careful about my own realities, and I would be working with this board and work with LMCH to ensure that they understand that, and that's their requirement. They are obviously staff members of the city, and that role is their responsibility. Where they find themselves in conflict, they can declare it.
I'll come back to further questions there. Deputy Mayor?
I'd just like to hear from Mr. Card, perhaps, about how, specifically with Ms. Anderson, I understand that generally how it could be handled for staff members, but she has a particular kind of role.
Mr. Card?
Your Worship, Ms. Anderson would, as Ms. Daters-Beer mentioned, declare a conflict of interest if there was any chance of a conflict. And I would point out that it's only in the event that London Middlesex Community Housing and the city found themselves at odds that there would be conflict. I mean, if the housing organization came forward for a land use change that was approved by the council, there wouldn't be any conflict of interest, so that wouldn't pose a problem. In the event that we ended up with a conflict, we'd be moving to outside counsel, but I do believe that that's a remote possibility.
Deputy Mayor? Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a follow-up to another question that I have about the composition of the board. So now we're down to 4 members, and I understand that the manager of housing services will be there to provide support. I'm very pleased to see that. But getting back to the composition, if for some reason staff that we have elected to the board aren't able to complete their position, what would be the process of another member coming into this interim board? Just want to kind of know as we move forward how that we're not sort of creating other situations that may be difficult for us to or have to revisit again. So the question again would be if a member of the board that we nominate this evening is unable through the interim process to be still a member, how would the new member come to be on the board?
Ms. Livingston, back through you to staff.
Yes, Your Worship. It would be the process we're following this evening, where we would bring back to you a recommended replacement to a shareholder meeting. I would like to think that we will not be in that position, that what will come back to you next will be a recommendation of what a permanent community board would look like. But should we be in that situation, it would be following exactly what we're doing this evening.
Ms. Hopkins? You're good. Thank you very much. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. I have no particular concerns. I think Deputy Mayor Helmer raised a good question with regard to the one member of the board. I have no additional concerns other than that we have gone from an initial recommendation of 5 now down to 4, and the fact that this presents a much greater chance potentially of tie votes, and that we haven't brought forward a 5th name to replace Mr. Barrett. So I just wonder through you to staff why an alternate name wasn't brought forward and why it was decided that 4 was better than 5.
Ms. Livingston?
Mr. Mayor, it was a late notification to ourselves this afternoon that there would be a change from 5 to 4. I'm confident that the board can manage reaching a set of decisions, and I'm certain, and perhaps Ms. Daters-Beer can speak to this, but I'm certain they have their own procedures for their board meetings and making decisions. So I'm not particularly worried about it. I would note that we're going from 1 to 4 with the assistance of Mr. Purdy, so I'm confident that that group of people can proceed and make decisions.
Ms. Daters-Beer, do you wish to add to that?
I concur completely through the chair.
Councillor Lewis? Thanks very much. Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just quickly picking up on the points of Councillors Lewis and Hopkins. To Councillor Lewis's point, I think in this circumstance with 4 members, if there was a tie, then probably any decision on a tie shouldn't be going forward anyway, because there's not good consensus of the people who are supposed to be giving some good oversight to LMCH in the meantime. My concern, or I guess my question, picking off of Councillor Hopkins' question about the process for adding somebody later on, is obviously the fate of LMCH is top of mind for council. It's something that we have a very strong interest in and continue to. I just wonder why at this opportunity there wasn't a thought to perhaps placing a councillor on the board as well.
Ms. Livingston?
Your Worship, at this point, we were moving to move from the single board member of Ms. Daters-Beer, and with her departure, we were looking to move quickly to put an interim board in place. It is completely understood that the desire is to move back to a community board. We heard the discussion at the last council meeting with respect to prior composition and the role of councillors on that board. So really this is in an effort to continue the work, the number of responsibilities that you see in Appendix A, and moving forward with administration at this point because it's interim, and again trying to move quickly to returning with a set of recommendations for the permanent community board.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you, through Your Worship. That's helpful. I can appreciate the desire to move quickly. I would differentiate a council involvement with this from a community involvement. I see how they might be seen as parallel, but the interim, the movement into a new structure is something that we're very much involved with, and I would like to just kind of, I guess, put my emphasis that I think it would be important either to move quickly back to a regular operating board, or to get a political involvement to a minor degree at least with this board and its functions. That transition and how the board shapes itself and what the next steps are, I think are still very much in our interest, and something we hold in high importance. So I can support what's put in front of us here, but I still have some reservations on that.
So noted. I didn't hear that as a question of staff. Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Van Holst, sorry again, I don't see it on this screen. Yes, I did. I now see you. Thank you. And thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. I appreciate Councillor Turner's comments, and I did mention it at the last meeting that I'd like to see a councillor on this interim board, especially if it's going to take potentially to the end of the year. So although I'm happy with the slate that's been presented to us by the staff, if this is the appropriate time, I'll make the motion that we have a councillor on the interim board as well, and I'll look for a seconder.
Do you have a seconder? It looks like Councillor Turner has seconded that. I didn't hear a timing on that, Councillor Van Holst. I just heard that you felt that that was important. I'm not sure we're talking tonight, but I guess what I'm looking to do is I'm wondering where we might go forward with this. Just bear with me as a moment. I'm just going to check procedurally the step on this. Ms. Livingston, why don't you add to this for just a moment, please, just to add some clarity.
Your worship, I would just point out that should council wish to move in this direction, there is also a Middlesex County to consider.
So noted as well. Thank you. Everybody heard that? You didn't hear that, Councillor Turner? Could you repeat that, Ms. Livingston, for the benefit of all of us again, please?
My apologies, through you, your worship, I was just noting that should council wish to move in this direction, you may wish to think about Middlesex County and their role here as well.
Everybody heard that now? All right. So there is a motion that's been seconded on the floor. Any other comments with respect to this? Councillor Turner? Councillor Turner?
Yeah. Trying to find my little cursor here. Yeah, to that point, then I think if Councillor Van Holst is interested in amending that to have representation from the City and County Council, I think it's an appropriate suggestion from Ms. Livingston.
Councillor Van Holst, I think that's an ask of you, and then we'll move to Councillor Squire for his comments.
I consider that a friendly amendment, and it seems like the seconder is in agreement.
So I'll go to Councillor Squire, then Councillor Kayabaga.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is more supportive of the idea of having political involvement on the board when it's reconstituted. But I think at this particular time, with what we're trying to do with the corporation, I think having the expertise there of staff primarily and solely for a short period of time is probably the best approach. The other issue is putting this together. I don't know what the plan was to do tonight from a governance point of view of people putting their names forward to be members of the board, and we're going to deal with that tonight. I don't know about that. I get the idea of political representation, and I'm on a board, obviously LTC, that has political representation, and it's important. I just think that a short interim period, I don't think it should necessarily be, but a period of time when that's what we have, I think is fine. So I think at this point, I'm going to support the motion as is, although I'm a big supporter of having political representation when we get past the period of time that we're in right now we just lost the senior staff member. So I think it's a time where we have a lot on our plate in this direction. I'm going to support going.
I have Councillor Kayabaga, Ms. Livingston, Councillor Lewis, and Deputy Mayor Helmer. Councillor Kayabaga, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I just wanted to ask a question on the political representation. It was my understanding that the last time we had this conversation, the board itself was seeking to get 2 councillors from the City of London. So basically 2 councillors instead of just 1. I'm wondering if that's what we're going to do. And I'm also in between, having to wait to put political representation for now. I do understand where my colleagues are coming from, but I'm not sold on putting councilors right now, because it would take that. We would have to connect with the county as well, and that might slow down some work that the board may have to do. I'm just wondering from staff point of view, if to put on councilors right now, if it would take longer to do the work that you need to do. And my second question, I guess, would be around if we're going to add councilors, can we still do more than one person as the board and the organization had requested previously?
Let's turn that back then. It's a question to staff. So let's ask Ms. Livingston.
I believe the purpose of the slate that we've put forward for your consideration is to continue to try and do the work that Ms. Dater-Spear was leading in the short term, with the clear plan to bring back the recommended community slate later this year. And it would be at that period of time that I think you would see further consideration to the number of councillors recommended to be part of it. So our purpose is to address the immediate priorities that are outlined in Appendix A of the report. And I would also note that there is a timing issue here, in that the reason we were working to bring forward this current slate to you was to allow for a training and transition time with Ms. Dater-Spear's departure. And I don't know if she might like to add to my comments.
Ms. Dater-Spear.
Through the chair, there are a number of priorities as per the appendix attached to the report, but clearly this board will need to get acting on something 5 things really quickly. They need to secure a new CEO, a process that I have already started as the board. They will need to support the agency improving its vacancy numbers, and the agency is doing that. It needs to start and continue to implement the approvals you made as council on its multi-year budget and its business cases. And it needs to look at COVID-related issues as a housing provider, and then come back to you with a new board of a recommendation for the board. They will be asking for a shareholders meeting in June of 2020. That's another opportunity for you as the shareholder to understand the work that they've been doing over the last little while. I do think, further to Ms. Livingston's comments, it's important for the transition to happen, for that group to act quickly on the work that we've already started in collaboration with the agency and move it forward. I think it would become clear at some point in time, very clear, how quickly they can come back to you with a slate of new directors, including community stakeholders, council members. And if I was to say, I believe the clerk can confirm that there was a motion passed for 2 members of city council and 1 member of county council, but that requires clarity from the clerk.
Clerk, do you has to check that? I can go to the next speaker while you check that. All right, so on my list I have Councillor Lewis, Deputy Mayor Helmer, Councillor Hopkins, and Councillor Morgan, but it looks like the clerk has something now.
Through Mr. Mayor, Ms. Dater-Spear is correct. So it's they changed the composition to include an additional member of council, an additional citizen at large in June of 2019, and then in September they appointed Ms. Dater-Spear as the board.
Thank you. Does that, Councillor Kaibaga, does that answer your question? Does that provide clarity?
So yeah, I just had another question. So that's actually very informative to just remember that we did make it in a vote that we had 2 councillors instead of 1. And I just wanted to make sure that I heard clearly what Mrs. Dater-Spear said. Is this new interim board going to be voting on a new CEO, or the actual board that's going to come in after this interim board is going to vote for the new CEO?
Ms. Dater-Spear.
Through the chair, in my role as the board currently, I have initiated a process to fill the senior leadership role. Mm-hmm. The new board will be involved in hiring that individual, and I expect that will be done as soon as possible. The organization will require leadership moving forward, and it's important for it to be in place as soon as possible.
Councillor Kaibaga.
So this interim board that's being voted in, so with that information, I think that I'm going to support my colleagues motion to add the actual counselors that we said we would be adding, which is 2 of them, and the county counselor to be added on board as well.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, when this was proposed, I actually considered seconding it. As I've been listening to the debate here, I'm actually increasingly of the mind that this is not a route to go down right at this time. I'm a little concerned that we're getting into the weeds of the makeup of the interim council sort of on the fly here. First, it was one councillor, and then it was pointed out that, well, county has to have some representation too. I don't think that we've had any discussion with the county on this prior to today's meeting, although Ms. Livingston can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And now, and Councillor Kayabega was quite right in pointing out that we've previously passed a motion for 2 councillors, so now we would be talking about adding 3 additional people to this interim board that needs to be able to make some pretty flexible and time-sensitive decisions in fairly quick order. So right now, I think that this is not actually a motion that I can support, although I think that the political representation is very important. I'm really concerned that we're putting this together on the fly tonight, and hearing that we're going to get a shareholders report in June. I think that there's ample time for us to review this in just a couple of months. I think for now, I'm going to be leaning towards supporting the original staff recommendation and not the amendment, but I look forward to hearing what other members have to say.
Well, let's hear them then. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
My preference is to leave the board as a staff board for now. I didn't actually support the change in the first place, but having made it, I think that continuing on with the interim board the way that it is, essentially expanding it to a larger number of people, getting them some opportunities to overlap with Ms. Dittersbeer is the right thing to do for the time being. I certainly support generally the idea of having councillors from the county and the city on the board. It's one of the reasons I didn't support changing the board the way we did, but we did do that. And I think that that is, now that we're in that process, I think we should stick with it until we get back to what the future board will be like. And I think between now and the end of the year is a reasonable time to have this board of 4 people in charge of the Middlesex Community Housing. They have to do lots of important things. Ms. Dittersbeer's had to do lots of important things as the only board member since September. And I think going from 1 to 4 is a good change for now. And I'd be willing to consider more councillors appointed on some future board at the end of the year. And I would say, depending on how this vote goes at committee, I would advise against bringing it up at council if it's close to failing, because I don't want it to be a decided matter about not appointing councillors to the board if it's close.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor, for those comments. I think we have to be very, very careful. I too did not support the motion, just that. And now we're looking at an interim board, but I do think it is important that we stick to the needs that and the decisions that need to be made right away. And I am confident that staff can do that. Having not having councillors on the board and not having community representation and history, a part of the history of London Middlesex community housing is something that is very, very important. But I think that can happen. I would have concerns if we were going to have this interim board for going into a year or over a year, but we are looking at a very short time here and decisions need to be made. So I am very, as much as I want to have that political representation. For now, I'm confident. We've got a shareholders meeting coming up in June. It's another time for the conversation to happen and concerns can be discussed at that time. But I am not supportive of the motion right before us now.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, and thank you to Councillor Hopkins for her comments. I agree, and what I think we need to do with this board is we need to keep it focused on the task at hand. The reason why we went down to a smaller board is to be very focused on a couple of key issues, to make decisions very all the comments about the type of composition that should be on this board, but I think we want to do this incrementally, and this particular recommendation from our staff is a good incremental step. Adding beyond that, I think, just gets us to the conversation that we ultimately want to have, which is what should the overall representation of this board be? And it isn't just 2 counselors and a county counselor, it's also lived experience and the other skill sets that have been identified in the past. But for now, the members recommended by staff cover the skill sets that are needed in the short term, and I think we should approve those, let them do the work, but continue to have the thoughts and work towards the process of what will the overall community board look like when we get to that point. I'm just not there that we're at that point yet. I think we should follow our staff's recommendation, even though I agree with all of the points that colleagues are making about representation on the board generally. I think now is the time to just stick with the staff advice, make the incremental decision to move it a little bit larger and deal with the political and other representation issues at the next step.
Thank you. I have Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just agreeing with some of my colleagues' concerns that I would like to see some political representation on this board, but hearing Ms. Dater-Spear's concerns about slowing things down and how fast things are moving right now with the multi-year budget concerns and COVID, which we're all dealing with. Wondering, like, I don't want to delay this, but at the June update of the shareholders meeting, would that be an adequate time to bring forward the 2 recommendations for the city and 1 from Middlesex County, recognizing they need an opportunity to ask their councillors as well about who would be interested in serving?
I think I'll ask Ms. Livingston because of the timing on that question. She can choose to pass.
Your Worship, of course we would implement anything. I would just like to indicate that we are in the middle of a pandemic, and there are many things that are in front of staff to do right now, including taking on the responsibilities here. And I think there is some work that would be required around a process for councillors by June. I would ask that council give us the time for this interim board to do their work and come back to you before the end of the year with a thoughtful set of recommendations on the board.
Councillor?
Yeah, no, I'm good with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I've got Councillor Van Holst, Councillor Lee.
Thank you. So the reason I moved this was because I believe that some council representation could actually does move forward quickly. Hearing the end of the year might have been the point at which we got a recommendation. That's not soon enough for me. Hearing also that there's going to be the hiring of a director, I think we definitely need some representation from Middlesex County and from London, because I think it'll be much less likely that a new board will decide that the choice made by our staff was not appropriate, and then have to hire a new CEO. So I would like to see some input, political, into that decision as well. So my motion would be to appoint someone from our city, either tonight, or could be by the next council meeting, and provide an invitation to Middlesex County to do the same. They certainly don't have to, but that invitation would be there. And then the board would be made up of the slate provided by our city staff tonight, and whomever we decide to add as the representative from our council.
Councillor Van Holst, you already have a motion on the floor. Trying to amend that motion before we vote on that? Can you give some
Mr.
clarity to that,
Mayor, I
please?
was just attempting to provide a little more clarity if it seemed, if it didn't seem clear.
Actually, respectfully, that seems less clear. What I'm trying to understand is I understood your first motion, the seconded by Councillor
Okay, well
Turner.
then I'm happy with that first motion, if it's clear to you.
All right, well, let's make sure it's also clear to Councillor Turner because he's up next, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks to Councillor Van Holst. I would have interpreted it the way Councillor Van Holst just articulated it, that this isn't a motion to appoint somebody tonight. It's a motion to ensure that there's a representative from our council and an invitation to county council to provide one each representation on the interim board. It should not impair or delay the ability for what's in front of us right now to be executed. I think that's easily enough done. I think the comments by Ms. Daters-Bear really underscore why it's important right now to have a council member on this. The decisions and the challenges faced by LMCH right now are large. As Deputy Mayor Helmer indicated, he had apprehensions about the direction that we were going on with the removing the board and appointing a sole staff member. Now that we're expanding a board, this is going a little bit deeper than just the single action that we took before that was going to where Ms. Daters-Bear was the interim board. Now we're appointing a board. And if we're going to do that, then we should have council representation on it. I think it's very important, especially in light of the fact that there will be an appointment of a new CAO or CEO for the organization. So I think Councillor Van Holst's motion that, and if I interpreted that correctly, I'm not sure how it's been worded by staff yet, that that council appoint a member to the board as well at a future time, and that the county council be invited to appoint a member as well. And that should not get in the way of what's in front of us. I think it's a separate clause and doesn't need to be executed tonight. And we can go through the normal process of figuring out who the council rep would be at a later time.
Thank you for that. Before Councillor Salee, just so that there is clarity to what it is that we are speaking to, a motion on the floor that's been moved and seconded, I'd like to ask the clerk to just bring some clarity so there's focus on the discussion. And I have Councillor Salee on the list. And then Councillor Cassidy and Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Mr. Mayor, the motion that we have on the floor is that the proposed composition of the interim board for the London Middlesex Community Housing include a member of City Council and a member of County of Middlesex Council. The terms of reference in the bylaws needing that are before you tonight to be amended to change the composition.
Okay, separate discussion as part of all of this would be, but thank you for that. Councillor Salee, could I invite you for your comments, please?
Thank you very much. I'm glad that Councillor Van Holst and Councillor Turner brought this forward. I wholeheartedly support it. I think, you know, I maybe wouldn't have been inclined, but the fact that we're hiring or the board is hoping to hire a new CEO, I think it's incumbent on us to ensure that we have a political representative there. The reality is that is probably the number one, if not the most important job of a board, is the hiring of a new CEO. So I think for that reason alone, I think is exactly why we need to head in that direction. The fact that this will be a board that, you know, it is the number one priority for council housing. And I know that we need to make sure that we're involved and we have a good pulse on it. I know staff definitely can, you know, are always available to provide information and to check in with us when we have specific questions. But I know that when we have board representation from council members, it is sometimes helpful. And I know that's why sometimes if I have questions specific to a specific board, I could reach out on a political level and have those political conversations that sometimes staff necessarily might not be able to fully engage in. And I think sometimes that's helpful. So I would encourage everyone around the horseshoe to support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy. Have we lost you? Cassidy on the speaking list.
Maybe go to the next one.
Deputy Mayor Helmer, why don't we have you, and then if we can bring Councillor Cassidy. I see Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Squire want to weigh in on this as well. Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
I'm going to do my best to try and talk everyone who's supporting this idea out of that. So I want you to think about the power dynamics that would exist with 4 staff members from the City of London, so a majority of the board, 1 or 2 city councillors, and a county councillor. And what the board discussion would be like if there was a disagreement between, say, the 4 staff people and the councillors. How is that going to work? Right? On the board, everyone is going to be equal, and they're going to be in their role as board members. But in reality, in the rest of their life, some people are staff members and other people are councillors at the place where those people work. And I think it's not going to be a very well functioning board to have that dynamic. So I think it's it's either staff and only staff, or it's councillors and other board members who are not staff. I think those are kind of the choices we have. And we've gone to a staff board. So I think what we should do at this point is expand the staff board, and that is it. I do think the longer term future for the board is councillors from the county and the city and other people who are not City of London staff. I think that's where we're going. But in the meantime, this interim board, and this is not the permanent board, and I get that they're hiring a CEO, and people think that's very important because it is important. But before, they had a CEO and they had to be the board, and it was just as important then. And I think it's staff only or councillors. And I do not think staff and councillors on the board together is a good idea. I do not think it's a good idea. I think it will create weird dynamics where people, like, for example, I think staff will hold back if they're in disagreement with a councillor on hiring the CEO. How is that going to work? I do not think that's a good idea. So I think, like, I get why people want to get councillors on the board as soon as possible. I understand there's this limited window where the CEO is going to be hired. Perhaps one way of doing that is to, say, put a contract that's shorter, that the board can consider, like, don't make a really long-term appointment for the CEO. I think there's other ways of managing that issue that don't involve us having councillors and staff members on the board at the same time. So I'm just going to leave that with you. I do think it's a great discussion to have, but I don't agree with the direction that some people are advocating, and I disagree with it pretty strongly. So I wanted to reiterate that.
Thank you. We'd lost Councillor Cassidy. I was going to call on Councillor Hopkins, but if you don't mind, Councillor, I've got Councillor Cassidy back in, and let's hear from her.
Thank you. My apologies. My computer just timed out on me. So, and then I had to get back into the meeting. So I'm glad actually that I came back in just as Deputy Mayor Helmer was speaking, because he made some really good points that it was useful for me to hear. I want to point out that this is not what's being proposed in the staff recommendation is not the permanent board. It says right in part 1 of the recommendation, an interim board. So this is an interim board. I understand the argument for having political representation, but in normal times, the representation on this board would be political and community. And so we're not even going there. We're only looking at appointing 1 councillor, so it's not even fulfilling the latest recommendation that council made about the makeup of this board. It's going against that, 1 councillor, and then as an afterthought, an invite to county council for representation. I think what we're doing is scrambling and throwing something together really quickly, and we're trying to rush things along. Staff have, this has been a long and pretty thoughtful process. We were in a situation that required an immediate action and kind of a drastic action. We're not ready to come out of that interim period yet. The drastic actions that we took as a council put us in this interim period where we're trying to get things back on track. And we assigned Ms. Daters-Beer to do that, to take on that role of getting things back on track. Things are not back on track yet. And we've thrown in a whole new mess of things. We are having some staff changes, and we're in the middle of a COVID epidemic that we're dealing with. This is not the time to try to rush things along and pretend that everything's normal. Things are not normal. I think this is a wise move. This is a wise recommendation from staff. We need to allow this to carry on and for staff to carry out the tasks that need to be done to get things back on track. I will not be supporting the amendment, and especially after hearing from the city manager. It's exactly what the deputy mayor said. There is a hesitation a lot of times from staff to directly contradict a city councillor. And so Ms. Livingston, in the strongest terms possible, I would say was pretty adamant that this is not the direction that staff are recommending. But even in her comments, they were very measured and polite. But when you read through that staff response, you can hear that staff seem to be very strongly opposed to doing something different from what they are recommending in their report. I urge colleagues to please support the staff recommendation and not support this amendment.
Colleagues, Hopkins, Councillor Squire, and Councillor Kayabaga, but I was just keeping track here. We've got several individuals that have spoken twice, a few that have spoken once, some that haven't spoken, may choose not to. It will not be the role of the chair to limit any conversation on this. But I just want to make sure that we've heard from individuals who may wish to, and I'm trying to do this in the order as I've been acknowledged, and that's been acknowledged to me. So we're going to hear from some folks, and if there are others that want to weigh in on this as well that haven't, we certainly welcome that. But let's go with Councillor Hopkins, can we please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to speak again. I do think this is an important conversation that we're having here, and I appreciate the comments. Again, it's funny how things turn out. I am now defending something that I didn't start off supporting, but where we're going here now is starting to become a concern for me. And one of the things I heard was that we are now inviting a Middlesex representative. And I would assume that if we're going to have a city councillor from the City of London, we also need a Middlesex County representative. We don't go and invite them and ask them if they want to join. I would think that in our recommendations going forward that we already have assigned 2 councillors and a councillor from the county. So again, we're starting to change this interim board. And I again want to stress the importance of it is an interim board. We're going to have not only political representation, but community representation. And here we go again. I think what I've heard from this discussion as well is that there tends to be a desire for maybe some councillors who want to be part of the hiring process of the CEO. And there could be opportunities there where they can sit in or be privy to those to that process. But now's the time. Now is not the time to have more. The time is to have less now, so the work can proceed, given the crisis that we're not only dealing with, the pandemic, but also the work that needs to be done on this board. I know the amount of work that has to be done. I sat on that board for 4 years. Again, I would encourage my colleagues not to support this, even though I appreciate the sentiments of the motion and where we will be going sooner than later.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to help maybe in an area that I can, and it's the area of the CEO. When I was chair of Habitat for Humanity, I had to terminate the leader of the organization on a moment's notice, and we had to do a search and decide on a permanent director. And rather than we didn't have to do that in a sort of an interim basis, we hired someone on contract who knew they were coming in on contract. They were experienced. They came on contract. They did the work that needed to be done, and then we conducted the search for a permanent CEO. I would really recommend to Ms. Datters-Beer, and the one thing I don't agree with was her sort of adamance, if I could call it that. Well, we've got to hire a full-time replacement in this interim period. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that function can be accomplished through an interim appointment, a contractual appointment, anything like that, because I think that's the one area where I am concerned in saying, well, this interim board is going to hire someone on a permanent basis and long term. I think that can easily be worked around, and I just want to adopt what the deputy mayor said. I think he put it in a way that I think makes a lot of practical sense. You know, they have specific things they need to get done, and I hate to say this, I'm a politician. They will get this done with this 4-person board better without politicians there.
On that note, Councillor Kayabaga, please.
I actually lowered my hand. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I have no other speakers on the speakers list. Councillor Slee, I still see a hand up. It's been up. I thought that was from the original, but
it is. My bad.
Not at all. Do we need the motion reread? I'm not getting a request for that. So this is a motion moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Turner. This is one we will do. We will vote on the screen. Thank you. Which means I'll do the roll call once we're ready. So we'll start in ward order. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
No.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Nay.
Councillor Cassidy. I'll come back. There may be some. Councillor Cassidy, are you back?
I'm here, but I can't.
No, we're not voting. We're doing it verbal. I've lost your audio.
She's on mute.
Maureen, you're muted.
I know I'm having a hard time because I have a monitor and a laptop, and sometimes, anyway, no.
Thank you. That was a long no. Sorry. Councillor Squire.
No.
Councillor Morgan.
Nay.
Councillor Lehman.
No.
Councillor Hopkins.
Sorry, nay.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
No.
Councillor Turner.
Yay.
Councillor Pelosa.
No.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yay.
Councillor Hillier.
No.
Motion is lost, 4-11.
Thank you very much. So to the report as presented by Ms. Livingston. And I'll look for a motion to receive that report. Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Comments, questions? I've got a couple of hands. Councillor Morgan.
Yes. So first, my understanding is that we're not just receiving the report, that we would be making a motion to take the actions in the report. So could you just confirm that, and then I'll make some comments.
That's correct. Councillor Morgan, your comments?
Yes. So I just wanted to make just a really brief comment. I want to thank Ms. Wilcox, Mr. Milson, Mr. Yeoman, and Ms. Anderson and of course, Mr. Purdy, who will support this group. They all got other things to do, and I just think they're going to volunteer, they're going to be on this board, and they're going to provide some really phenomenal expertise that is going to help this organization with the challenges that they have and the important path ahead. So they're probably listening tonight. I just wanted them to be very clear to them that they have my absolute support and confidence and appreciation for taking this on. It's not going to be easy work. It's going to be very important work, and it's going to have a lot of scrutiny and a lot of people watching. So I wanted to share those thoughts today, and I'm in complete support of the staff recommendation.
Thanks very much. I have Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, I'll reiterate some of what Councillor Morgan said. I'm supportive, and what needs to be delivered. Again, why I supported the last motion was the fact of the hiring of a new CEO. So kind of what Councillor Squire said, hopefully they could take that into consideration. And I'll say it myself, hopefully, because I don't want to put a motion right now to ask them to not do that. But I really encourage them to not hire a CEO at this time. I recognize that there's pros and cons to it both, but I really, really strongly believe that decision should be made by the long-term group. I just don't want to find ourselves in a position where a year from now, the long-term group doesn't find the synergies or the direction that they're looking for to head it is not aligned with who right now is being hired in an interim basis in this climate. And I know, recognizing Councillor Squire said we could consider a contract, but I guess with these positions, the searches sometimes are a little bit expensive. So I don't know if we'd be even able to do that, but I don't know if we believe in the interim to just appoint someone from City Hall, but I'll leave that, and thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to say I have a lot of faith in the people who have been put forward for this board. I'm losing a lot of faith in the process. So that's why I supported the motion before. And I'm very, very concerned about the future. So I really hope that that whatever needs to be done is executed quickly and appropriately. And I look forward to hearing the update in June.
Thank you. I have no one else on the speakers list. I'll check with the clerks. No. Seeing no one else on the speakers list, we'll do the roll call in just a moment.
I just wanted to clarify that this is the revised bylaw that has a reduction from 5 to 4 members.
Yes, I think that was clarified by Councillor Morgan, but yes, it is. Let's go then. The roll call. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yay.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yay.
Councillor Morgan.
Yay.
Councillor Lehman.
Yay.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yay.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yay.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yay.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yay.
Councillor Hillier.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. That's all we had. That particular portion of the agenda. I have no items that are scheduled. I have no items for direction. I have no deferred matters nor additional business, but if I might just make one comment. The clerk was concerned I was going to wax eloquent. When I wax eloquent, it is always interesting. I was going to just simply say thank you. Apparently that's allowed to do, but it really does matter. I mean, you have been extremely supportive through this process, so as much as we acknowledge and appreciate the staff for all that they've done, and it's sincere, we made those comments earlier in a prior meeting. I just want to say thanks to all the councillors and the deputy mayor for the work that you've been doing, paying attention to what is going on. So with that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Let's do a hand vote on that. All those in favor, Not sure if Councillor Slee wants to do a thumbs up on that. He's already there, all right. Meeting adjourned, thank you all.